Marcus Hale had never thought of himself as fragile. The Marines had stripped that out of him long ago, along with fear, hesitation, and the luxury of sleep. 15 years in the Corps had taught him to move through the world like water, silent, adaptable, unstoppable when necessary. He'd seen cities crumble, men vanish into smoke, and promises break under the weight of orders. But when he stepped off that last military transport and felt the southern wind of his hometown again, he thought, foolishly, that maybe he'd earned a little peace. He bought a small, weather-beaten house at the edge of town. It wasn't much, just 2 rooms and a creaking porch, but it had a view of the woods and a narrow road that led to nowhere in particular. Perfect, he thought. He spent the mornings fixing the roof, the afternoons at the auto shop where he worked part-time, and the evenings sitting on that porch, listening to the cicadas hum like distant engines. There was a rhythm to it all. A quiet life. But even in the quiet, Marcus could feel the eyes. The stares that lingered too long at the gas station. The way conversations stopped when he walked into the diner. He'd grown up here. He remembered the same families, the same church, the same old men who'd never forgiven him for being too confident for a colored boy. He'd left at 18, wearing a fresh uniform and carrying the pride of his mother's tears. Now, at 40, he returned with scars they couldn't see and discipline they couldn't imagine. Still, to them, he was just another outsider with dark skin and quiet strength they didn't understand. It started with whispers. Someone spray-painted his mailbox one night. Go back. He cleaned it up without saying a word. A week later, he found a dead bird nailed to his fence post. He buried it and moved on. He told himself he'd seen worse, and he had. But deep inside, that old Marine instinct began to hum, the same one that had kept him alive when everything else around him fell apart. Something was coming. The night it happened was clear and windless. The moon was sharp enough to cut the darkness in half. Marcus had just finished polishing the handlebars of his old Harley when he heard the first sound, tires crunching gravel. Then another. Then laughter. He looked up and saw headlights, too many of them, bouncing down the narrow road toward his house. 5 trucks, maybe 6, engines revving like a pack of hunting dogs. He didn't reach for a weapon. He didn't even move. He just stood there, watching as they stopped at the edge of his property. A dozen men got out, faces covered with bandanas, beer bottles in hand. One of them, tall, broad, carrying a crowbar, stepped forward and shouted, "You picked the wrong neighborhood, boy." The others howled in agreement, their voices thick with drink and hatred. Marcus's voice was calm. "You should go home." That only made them angrier. The first rock hit his porch light, shattering it. Another smashed through his window. Someone kicked his fence down. One man poured gasoline from a canister, the liquid glistening in the moonlight. Another struck a match and threw it. The flames leapt up instantly, orange and hungry, licking across the wood like they'd been waiting for this moment. Marcus didn't flinch. He watched his home, the only piece of peace he'd built for himself, begin to burn. The gang laughed louder, filming on their phones, shouting words they hadn't earned the right to say. "That's what happens when you think you belong here," one yelled. The smoke thickened, rising in black coils that blurred the stars. Then, for just a moment, the laughter faltered. Marcus stepped closer to the fire, his face half lit by the flames. The heat shimmered against the calm in his eyes. He looked at them, not as victims. Look at their tormentors, but the way a predator studies prey. Silent, measuring, waiting. Something in that look made 2 of the younger men hesitate. One whispered, "Hey, man, maybe we should go." But the leader, drunk on power and smoke, just grinned wider. "What's he gonna do? Huh? Call the cops." Marcus didn't move until the last truck pulled away, their taunts echoing down the empty road. Only then did he exhale, long and controlled, like a man coming out of a long dive underwater. His house crackled behind him, collapsing inward with a groan. The smell of burning wood and gasoline filled the air. He could have called for help. He could have shouted, chased them, raged at the sky. Instead, Marcus turned his back on the fire and walked down the dirt road, his boots silent on the earth. He knew their voices now, their faces behind the masks, their gait, their habits. Marines didn't forget. By the time the fire department arrived, there was nothing left to save. The sheriff asked if he'd seen who did it. Marcus just looked at the ashes, then at the horizon, where the last traces of smoke drifted into the night. "I saw enough," he said quietly. And when he walked away, the air seemed to change, like the world itself understood that something had shifted. The men who had come for Marcus Hale thought they'd destroyed a home. What they had really done was wake something that never should have been disturbed. Marcus didn't sleep that night. He sat on the curb in front of the smoking ruins until the first light of dawn pushed the shadows back. The air still smelled like gasoline and wet ash, and the embers glowed faintly in the wreckage. He could hear the faint chatter of firefighters behind him, the crackle of radios, the metallic click of equipment being packed away. But all of it was background noise. His mind had gone somewhere else, back to places with different fires, different screams, different reasons. He wasn't angry in the way ordinary people got angry. Anger was loud, unfocused. Anger made mistakes. Marcus had learned to bury that long ago. What rose inside him now was colder, sharper, an alertness, a hum under his skin. The kind of awareness that used to come right before an ambush, when every sense widened and the world slowed down to single breaths and heartbeats. By noon, the police had finished their report. They promised to look into it, though Marcus could see from the way they avoided his eyes that they already had a narrative ready. "Probably just some kids messing around," one deputy said. Marcus nodded once, expression unreadable. He'd seen that kind of cowardice in war zones too, the type that wore a badge instead of a mask. He borrowed a shirt from a neighbor, an older woman who'd known his mother. She didn't ask questions. She just pressed her hand over his for a second and whispered, "Don't let them win, Marcus." He nodded again, but this time there was a faint curve to his lips, a smile without warmth. By sunset, he was moving. Not toward the motel they'd offered to put him in, but toward town. The same town that had raised him and spat him out. He parked at a gas station and watched the evening crowd gather at Miller's bar across the street. Pickup trucks lined the lot, some with the same rusted flags he'd seen last night painted on the hoods. A familiar energy buzzed there, cheap beer, bad ideas, and hate disguised as laughter. Marcus stepped inside the store, bought a coffee, and leaned casually against the window. Through the glass, he could see them. The same stance, the same gait. You learn to read people's bodies in the military, their habits, their rhythms. The tall one with the crowbar. He leaned on his left leg, probably had a knee injury. The one with the gasoline canister had a habit of cracking his neck every few seconds. Another kept checking his phone, replaying something on it and laughing. Marcus didn't need to guess what. He sipped his coffee. No emotion, no rush. That night, he drove to the outskirts, to the old train depot that hadn't been used in years. He'd gone there as a boy to skip stones on the tracks. Now it would serve a different purpose. He set up a small table inside, unfolded a map of the county, and began marking places, bars, hangouts, garages. He remembered the trucks, license plates half seen through smoke. 2 started with DWL, 1 with 57T. Details like that had saved lives once, now they would do the same again. For 2 days, he gathered information. He watched, listened. He didn't hide, he didn't need to. In a small town, people overlooked what they didn't want to see. A black man fixing his bike or sitting at a diner counter was just background noise. But Marcus saw everything. He followed the sound of laughter to a junkyard where 2 of them worked. He found another one at a hardware store, bragging to a friend about how the guy didn't even fight back. By the 3rd night, Marcus knew them all. Names, faces, families. He knew who carried weapons, who liked to talk, who followed, who led. He knew which one had filmed it. He could hear their voices even now, echoing through his mind, each syllable a map of arrogance. He didn't plan to kill them. That would have been too easy, and too merciful. Death ended fear. Marcus wanted the opposite. He wanted them to feel the way they'd made him feel for a single moment. Exposed, powerless, hunted. He began his work as the town slept. He started with the leader, the tall one. The man's truck was parked outside his trailer, and his front door was unlocked. Marcus didn't step inside. He simply stood in the doorway long enough to leave muddy footprints leading toward the bed. Then he left a small patch from his old Marine uniform on the kitchen counter. By morning, the man called the sheriff, stammering about, "Someone breaking in." The sheriff laughed it off, told him to lay off the booze. But Marcus wasn't done. That evening, another man found his gasoline canister sitting on his porch, empty, scrubbed clean. No fingerprints, just a folded note tucked inside that read, "You missed a spot." Each night, something new. A car tire slashed, a phone missing, a shadow outside a window. He wasn't seen, but his presence lingered everywhere. The town began to buzz again, this time with unease. The men stopped laughing at the bar. They stopped sleeping well. They whispered about what they'd done, afraid even to repeat it aloud. Marcus didn't need to touch them. He just had to remind them that monsters came in many forms, and sometimes, the quiet ones were the worst. By the end of the week, he was back at the ruins of his house, sitting on a crate, sipping coffee as dawn crept over the horizon. Somewhere across town, his name was being muttered in fear. The same name that once appeared on classified missions, now carried in whispers through cracked voices. Marcus Hale didn't believe in revenge. But he did believe in balance. And the balance, he decided, was just beginning to tilt. The news broke quietly at first. A short local report about a disturbance at an abandoned warehouse on the edge of town. The kind of headline people glanced over while sipping coffee, never realizing what lay beneath it. But for those who had been there, it wasn't a disturbance. It was judgment. By the time the police arrived, dawn had bled into the sky, pale and cold. The warehouse stood silent except for the occasional drip of water from the leaky roof. Inside, a dozen men sat slumped against the walls, their hands tied behind their backs with industrial zip ties. Faces bruised, eyes wide. Not one of them spoke when the officers demanded answers. Their fear filled the air, heavier than smoke. Sheriff Daniels, a man with too much gut and too little courage, squatted in front of the ringleader. "Who did this?" he asked. No answer. The man's lip trembled. Daniels tried again, softer. "Who tied you up? What happened here?" The ringleader lifted his eyes, bloodshot, hollow. He opened his mouth, but only one word came out, barely more than a whisper. "Marcus." That was all. Outside, in the soft light of morning, Marcus Hale sat on the same porch where his home once stood. The ground was blackened but cleared now, the charred remains of his life hauled away by quiet hands. A new foundation was marked out, fresh lumber stacked neatly to one side, cement bags lined in order. He'd begun rebuilding days ago, working alone, methodically. Each nail he drove into the earth felt like reclaiming something that had been stolen but not destroyed. He heard the sirens in the distance. He didn't flinch. He just kept working, the rhythm of the hammer steady, tap, tap, pause, tap. The sound of control. He didn't see himself as a hero. The word had been used too often, too easily, in places that didn't deserve it. He wasn't looking for glory, or for justice in the way the world defined it. What he'd done wasn't legal, but it was right. And right had always been a language the law struggled to understand. When the sheriff's car pulled up, gravel crunching under the tires, Marcus didn't stop. Daniels stepped out, removing his hat, looking more cautious than he ever had before. "Marcus," he said, voice measured, "we found them." Marcus glanced up, eyes calm and unreadable. "I know." Daniels hesitated. They said you." "I didn't touch them," Marcus interrupted quietly. "You can check for yourself." The sheriff studied him for a long moment, searching for something, remorse, guilt, maybe a crack of emotion. There was none, only the stillness of a man who had seen far worse than the judgments of small-town law. "You can't scare people like that," Daniels said finally. "That's not how we do things here." Marcus looked past him, toward the horizon. The sunrise painted the sky in shades of gold and crimson, colors that reminded him too much of things he'd seen on battlefields. "How we do things here," he repeated softly. "You mean letting them burn a man's home because they didn't like the color of his skin?" Daniels opened his mouth, closed it again. No words came. Marcus drove another nail into the wood. "I didn't scare them," he said. "I just showed them what fear looks like when it's earned." The sheriff sighed. "You planning to stay?" Marcus set down the hammer, straightened up, and looked him in the eye. "This is my home," he said simply. "I'm done running." The sheriff gave a slow nod, the kind that carried reluctant respect. You ever think about joining the force? He asked, half joking. Marcus smiled faintly. I've served enough forces. When Daniels left, Marcus returned to his work. The morning air grew warmer, and the sounds of town began to drift through, the hum of cars, the call of birds, the distant murmur of life continuing as if nothing had happened. But something had changed. Word spread fast in small places. The men who had once laughed at him no longer met anyone's eyes. They kept to their homes, their voices low, their trucks quiet. Hate had found a reason to hide, at least for now. As he worked, a shadow fell across the half-built foundation. It was Mrs. Brooks, the old neighbor who had given him a shirt the night his house burned. She carried a tray with coffee and cornbread, her hands trembling just a little. You shouldn't have to rebuild alone, she said. Marcus smiled. A real one this time, small but genuine. I'm not alone, he said, nodding toward the horizon. Not anymore. She stayed for a while, sitting beside him as he worked, talking about his mother and the days when the town still had kindness in it. The sun climbed higher, catching on the faint sheen of sweat on Marcus's arms, on the new boards rising slowly from the ground. He'd seen enough destruction for one lifetime. Now he was building something stronger, not just wood and nails, but a message. That no man, no matter how broken by war or hatred, had to surrender his peace. When the day ended, he stood back and looked at the first wall of his new house. It wasn't perfect, but it stood tall, solid, unshaken. In town, the men who had once worn masks now slept with lights on, their minds haunted by the quiet silhouette that had come for them in the dark. Marcus Hale didn't think of them again. He had no need. The fire was gone, but its lesson remained. Some battles are fought with guns. Others, with silence, patience, and the certainty that justice, in the right hands, doesn't always need to be seen to be felt.